Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Adrian Cole never thought a simple glance could unravel 12 years of marriage like a stack of cards waiting for the right wind. At 38, he was the principal conductor of the Cincinnati Symphony, a position earned through years of meticulous dedication and calculated sacrifices. His life followed a predictable, comfortable rhythm: morning rehearsals, quick lunches between administrative meetings, evening performances that filled the music hall with ecstatic applause. Heather, his 36-year-old wife and a marketing manager at a fast-growing tech company, was always there at concerts. She always sat in the same reserved seat in the 13th row, on the left, dressed in quiet elegance that complemented without competing with the theater's solemn atmosphere. To Adrian, that routine meant stability, shared success, the fulfillment of a life carefully planned since they met in college. On the rainy Tuesday in October, when everything began to go off-key, the orchestra was performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Adrian knew that piece as well as he knew the lines of his own hand, every crescendo, every pause heavy with melancholic tension. It was a piece that demanded not just technique, but absolute emotional surrender, and he'd spent weeks preparing specifically for this performance. The theater was packed, the dimmed lights creating that reverent, expectant atmosphere Adrian cherished. Between the second and third movements, during those brief seconds of silence separating one emotion from the next, Adrian instinctively glanced toward where Heather always sat. She was there, as expected, but she wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on someone 3 rows back, and there was something in that look that Adrian recognized immediately, even if it took him days to name it: intimacy. It wasn't casual admiration or friendly warmth. It was the kind of look two people exchange when they share secrets no one else knows. The man returned the glance with a nearly invisible smile, and Heather smiled back before quickly turning her eyes back to the stage. Adrian felt a strange unease settle in his chest, a dissonant note that didn't belong in the meticulously orchestrated symphony that was his life. For a fraction of a second, he lost his place, something that hadn't happened since his conservatory student days. The concertmaster gave him a subtle look of concern, but Adrian snapped back into focus instantly, raising his baton and guiding the orchestra back into Rachmaninoff's emotional flow. No one in the audience noticed the slip, but Adrian knew. And it bothered him for the rest of the performance. In the days that followed, Adrian tried to convince himself he was overreacting, projecting unfounded insecurities onto a single moment. Heather remained the same at home, attentive, present, making plans for the kitchen renovation they'd been discussing for months, suggesting summer vacation destinations with cheerful energy. She asked about rehearsals, praised his interpretations, complained about her boss who never recognized her work. Everything was perfectly normal. But Adrian had spent his entire life reading subtleties in complex scores, identifying nuances others missed, and there was a shift in tone he couldn't ignore. Small details began piling up like dissonant measures in a once harmonious symphony. Heather now checked her phone with a different frequency. Not obsessively, but with a new attention, a quiet urgency when a notification came in. She sometimes smiled at the screen, a brief smile that vanished the moment she noticed Adrian looking. The phone, which used to sit casually on the dining table or kitchen counter, now lived at the bottom of her bag or in another room. She started mentioning more after-work commitments, client meetings, networking drinks, corporate dinners that didn't appear on their shared calendar. When Adrian suggested dinner at his favorite restaurant or watching the movie she'd said she wanted to see, Heather often had something else to do, always with reasonable excuses, always with an apologetic tone that sounded genuine. 2 weeks after that Rachmaninoff night, Adrian woke at 3 a.m. and found Heather sitting in the living room, lit only by the blue glow of her phone, typing with intense focus. When she noticed him, she locked the phone quickly and said she was replying to an urgent work email. Adrian didn't press her, but something about that scene stuck in his memory like an inconvenient photograph. The next day, during a rehearsal break, he made a decision that, months earlier, he would have considered unthinkable, a violation of trust that contradicted everything he believed about healthy relationships. But the dissonant note in his life had become a constant noise he could no longer ignore. Adrian bought a high-definition microcamera designed to be discreetly installed in vehicles, the kind ride-share drivers use for safety. It was small enough to blend into the sound system, recorded high-quality video, and had enough memory to capture days of footage. The following Thursday, while Heather was at work, Adrian installed the device on the dashboard of the silver Audi A4 he'd given her for her 35th birthday. His hands trembled as he adjusted the camera's angle, positioning it to capture the interior of the car without being noticeable. He felt dirty, invasive, ridiculous. Part of him hoped the footage would prove he was being paranoid, that he could then remove the camera, silently apologize to the universe for his suspicion, and move on. The first week was a torment of anxiety and guilt. Every night after Heather fell asleep, Adrian locked himself in his office and reviewed the day's recordings. Monday, home to work to gym to home. Tuesday, work, lunch with a colleague at a familiar restaurant, back to the office. Wednesday, work, grocery store, home. Thursday, work, quick stop at a stationery shop, home. Friday, work, happy hour with coworkers at a downtown bar Adrian recognized, home. Everything was perfectly normal, even mundane. Adrian began to feel foolish, embarrassed by his own suspicion. Maybe that look in the theater meant nothing. Maybe he was projecting his own insecurities, his irrational fear that career success wasn't enough to keep her interested. On Sunday, he almost removed the camera. On Monday of the second week, Adrian conducted a morning performance for public school students as part of the orchestra's educational program. He got home around 3:30 p.m., earlier than usual, and decided to review that day's footage while Heather was still at work. The first videos showed her usual morning routine. Then, at 1:47 p.m., the recording showed something that made Adrian's world tilt like a collapsing stage. Heather's car was parked on the upper deck of a shopping center in Oakley, a neighborhood 20 minutes from her office and nowhere she had any legitimate reason to be at that hour. Adrian pressed play and watched in growing silence. Heather was alone in the car, checking her phone, adjusting her hair in the rearview mirror. There was nervous energy in her movements that Adrian recognized, the same agitation she had when waiting for something important, something exciting. 2 minutes later, a black Lexus ES pulled up beside the Audi. A man got out and, without hesitation, stepped into Heather's car through the passenger side. Adrian paused the video, zoomed in on the stranger's face. He looked to be in his 40s, dark hair neatly cut, wearing a perfectly tailored dark gray suit. Adrian didn't recognize him. He pressed play again. For 19 minutes, Adrian watched his wife kiss that man with an intensity that made him question everything he thought he knew about intimacy. Heather's hands on his face, fingers tangled in his hair. The way she smiled between kisses, a soft laugh Adrian recognized but couldn't remember the last time she'd directed it at him. There was familiarity in those movements, a rehearsed choreography suggesting this wasn't new, wasn't an impulsive mistake, but something cultivated over time. At the 12-minute mark, Adrian saw Heather whisper something in the man's ear, and they both laughed together in a way so intimate, so comfortable, it was worse than the kisses. Adrian watched the video 3 times in a row. The first time, he felt a shock that paralyzed him completely, an inability to process what he was seeing. The second time, rage rose like a red tide, flooding every thought. The third time, a cold, calculating calm took over, the same icy focus he used to dissect complex scores. He saved the video to his laptop, backed it up to an external hard drive, emailed a copy to his personal account, and saved another on a USB drive he kept in his theater locker. Evidence preserved in 4 separate places. Then, for the first time in 12 years of marriage, Adrian cancelled the afternoon rehearsal, citing a sudden migraine that left him incapacitated. His assistant was worried and offered to take him to the hospital, but Adrian refused and went home. It was 4:45 p.m. when Adrian walked into the house he shared with Heather in Mount Adams, a renovated Victorian with a view of the Ohio River they'd bought 5 years earlier. Heather was in the living room, slumped on the sofa, watching some reality show Adrian never understood the appeal of. She had a glass of Pinot Grigio in her hand and wore the comfortable sweatpants she reserved for relaxed afternoons. When she saw him, she smiled with that carefree familiarity of someone who isn't afraid of being caught, someone who believes her secrets are perfectly hidden. "You're home early," she said, pausing the show. "I thought you had rehearsal until 7. Adrian sat in the armchair across from her, not on the sofa beside her as he normally would. He kept a deliberate physical distance Heather didn't seem to notice. He took a deep breath, felt his hands tremble slightly, and placed them on his knees to steady them. "I cancelled the rehearsal," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "We need to talk about what you did this afternoon." Heather's smile faltered, but didn't disappear entirely. "What did I do? I had a normal workday." "Why?" "Heather." He said her name with almost pedantic patience, as if explaining something obvious to a slow student. "We need to talk about the Oakley shopping center. About the black Lexus. About the 19 minutes inside your car." Color drained from Heather's face in a visible wave that started at her cheeks and traveled down her neck. Her glass trembled in her hand. I don't know what you're talking about." Adrian picked up the laptop he'd brought with him, opened it with deliberately slow movements, and turned the screen toward her. He pressed play. The video began with Heather alone in the car, then the man entering, then the kisses. Adrian watched her face as she watched her own betrayal replay in high definition. He saw the exact moment denial became impossible, when her eyes filled with tears that streamed silently as the video continued. "Adrian, I can explain," she began, her voice breaking. "Can you?" he interrupted, closing the laptop with a sharp click. "Can you explain the 19 minutes? Can you explain how many other times this happened? Can you explain who he is?" Heather set her glass down on the table with trembling hands and covered her face. She began crying in earnest now, deep sobs that shook her shoulders. Adrian felt a bitter satisfaction realizing he felt no pity, only clinical curiosity about how she tried to justify it. "His name is Jason," she said between sobs, voice muffled by her hands. "I met him at a corporate event 6 months ago. It just happened. I didn't plan it." 6 months. Adrian repeated, savoring the information like poison. 6 months is a long time for something that just happened, Heather. This isn't an impulsive kiss at a party. This is 6 months of deliberate choices, calculated lies, 19 minutes in a car in a parking lot. I felt invisible. Heather suddenly shouted, lifting her tear-and mascara-streaked face. "You're always at the orchestra, always on tour, always obsessed with rehearsals and performances and recordings. When was the last time you really saw me, Adrian? When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about your schedule or my work commitments?" Adrian listened in silence, tilting his head slightly as he did when listening to a musician try to excuse a technical mistake with emotional justifications. When she finished, he waited 3 full seconds before answering. "Interesting," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "So the solution to feeling invisible was to betray 12 years of marital trust? That's it? You're so incapable of adult communication that you chose to stick your tongue in a stranger's mouth instead of having a difficult conversation with me?" "He's not a stranger." Heather protested, then stopped abruptly, realizing her mistake. "Oh." Adrian smiled without warmth. "So you two have a connection. That makes all the difference. Makes it all so special." Heather stood up, tried to move closer to him, but Adrian raised his hand in a gesture that stopped her instantly. "No. Stay where you are. Adrian, please. I love you. It was a midlife crisis, a stupid mistake, but I love you. We can get past this." "You can love me," Adrian said, picking up the laptop and standing. "But I don't trust you. And without trust, love is just a pretty word that means nothing." He walked toward the stairs, then stopped and turned to her one last time. "I'm sleeping in the guest room. Tomorrow, I'm calling a lawyer. You have until the end of the week to decide if you want to leave voluntarily or if you'd prefer to be escorted out by court order. For the next 3 days, Adrian and Heather existed in the same house like ghosts avoiding each other. She tried starting conversations several times, but he ignored her with surgical indifference. On Friday, Adrian hired Margaret Chen, a divorce attorney specializing in high-asset cases with a reputation for being ruthless but professional. Margaret reviewed the case with military efficiency. The house was in Adrian's name, inherited from his parents who had died 5 years earlier. Ohio was an equitable distribution state, not automatic division. The key would be documenting Heather's misconduct and her spending on the affair. Adrian spent the weekend meticulously cataloging the couple's finances. He found $14,287 Heather had spent over the last 5 months on luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, gifts not meant for him, all drawn from their joint account used for shared expenses. Dinners at Orchids at Palm Court costing $300. 3 stays at the Hotel Covington. A $1,800 bracelet bought at a jewelry store Adrian had never visited. He documented everything in organized spreadsheets by date, amount, and location, creating a financial narrative of the affair that would be impossible to dispute. The twist Adrian didn't expect came 3 months after the divorce was officially filed. He was in the orchestra's office, reviewing scores for the spring season, when his phone rang with an unknown Cincinnati number. He usually ignored such calls, but something made him answer. "Hello? Adrian Cole?" It was a mature, controlled female voice, but with an underlying tension. "My name is Catherine Brennan. You don't know me, but I know your case. I'm Jason's ex-wife." Adrian's stomach tightened. "Ex-wife? I found out about his affair with your wife 2 months ago, when I found messages on his phone he'd left unlocked. I filed for divorce immediately." Catherine paused, and Adrian heard the sound of something being moved, papers, maybe. "But there's something you need to know. Jason has a habit. He records his encounters with women. Videos. Without their knowledge." Adrian fell silent, processing the information. A wave of nausea rose in his throat. "I found an external hard drive hidden in his office," Catherine continued. "There are videos of Heather. Several. If you want to use them for any legal purpose, or even just to have all the evidence, I can provide copies." Adrian closed his eyes. Part of him wanted to see how far the betrayal went, how many other moments had been hidden from him. But a larger part, the part that still held on to some dignity, refused. "Thank you for the offer, Catherine," he said calmly. "But I have enough evidence. And honestly, I don't need to see anything else. I hope your divorce is resolved as fairly as possible for you." "Thank you," Catherine said, genuine surprise in her voice. "You're kinder than I would be." When Adrian hung up, he sat in silence for long minutes, staring at the scores scattered across his desk. Heather hadn't just betrayed him. She'd been used, filmed without consent, turned into content for a sordid collection of a man who'd probably done this with dozens of other women. Adrian felt a pang of something he couldn't name right away, but later recognized, a distant sadness, not for her, but for the person she'd become, for the choices that had led her there. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. The judge, reviewing the evidence presented by Margaret, including the car camera footage, documented spending, and Catherine's testimony about Jason's character, awarded Adrian the full house, 70% of their joint investments totaling $340,000, and exempted him from any alimony since Heather had substantial income of her own. Heather tried arguing she deserved compensation for her emotional contributions over the 12 years, but her lawyer knew it was a lost cause. 1 year and 2 months after that rainy Tuesday of Rachmaninoff, Adrian conducted the premiere of his first original composition, a 4-movement symphony he titled Beginnings. It was a piece about loss and rebirth, about dissonant notes that eventually find resolution in unexpected chords. The critique was exceptionally positive, and the music hall was packed with major donors, guest musicians, and longtime admirers. In the 13th row, on the left, sat Elena Rossi, 34, a violinist in the orchestra whom Adrian had started dating 4 months earlier. They'd met during a chamber rehearsal, and she'd won him over with her sharp intelligence, dry humor, and intuitive understanding of the demands of a life devoted to music. Elena didn't see Adrian's work as competition for attention, but as an essential part of who he was. She brought a lightness Heather never had, a capacity to be present without constantly demanding validation. After the concert, as Adrian greeted donors in the main lobby, accepting praise and answering questions about the composition, he saw Heather standing across the room. She was accompanied by a man Adrian didn't recognize, someone younger, dressed too casually for the occasion. Heather looked different. Thinner, her face marked with lines that hadn't been there a year ago. Her dress was elegant but lacked the meticulous care she'd once taken with her appearance. There was something diminished in her, an energy that had gone out. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Adrian saw she was waiting for something, a reaction, a sign of lingering hurt, maybe even residual desire. He kept his expression neutral for 1 second, 2, 3. Then, simply, turned back to the conversation he was having with an important donor, laughing at a joke the man had just made. No drama, no cinematic final confrontation. Just complete indifference, as if Heather were a stranger he had no interest in knowing. Minutes later, Elena appeared at his side with 2 champagne flutes, smiling with the natural ease he so appreciated. "Your symphony was magnificent," she said, handing him a glass. "Especially the third movement. The resolution was unexpected but perfect." Adrian accepted the glass and softly clinked it with hers. "Thank you. It was an interesting journey to compose." They walked together toward the theater exit, planning a late dinner at their favorite restaurant. Adrian didn't look back to see if Heather was still there, didn't feel the need to confirm whether she was watching them. For the first time in over a year, he felt the dissonant note that had disrupted his life had finally found resolution. Not in spectacular revenge or public humiliation of Heather, but simply in his own ability to move forward, to compose a new symphony where she had no role to play. As he drove along the lit streets of Cincinnati with Elena in the passenger seat, talking about weekend plans and laughing about a story she told about a disastrous rehearsal, Adrian thought that some compositions need to end abruptly, without elaborate codas or grand finales, so entirely new works can begin. And that perhaps the greatest victory wasn't making the traitor suffer, but simply having the strength to erase his importance, to turn him into a forgotten note in a score you've decided never to play again. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.